"Sir, this seat is for premium passengers only." The flight attendant's voice wasn't loud, but the slight emphasis on the word premium cut through the cabin like a quiet blade. Marcus Devonte Reed looked up from his phone. He wore a faded Justice for All hoodie, worn-down leather slides, and carried a conference tote bag from 2012. He looked more like someone who just dozed off outside the terminal than a CEO invited to speak at a global investment summit. Seat 1A, first class, the seat he occupied, was suddenly treated like restricted territory. An older man nearby whispered, "Probably here to deliver food." The flight attendant, Sarah Mitchell, glanced at the crumpled boarding pass Marcus handed her, printed at a Chinatown copy shop, folded in thirds like a menu. She frowned, as if she'd just touched a counterfeit legal document. And within the next 45 minutes, the prestigious airline would never operate the same way again. If you've ever seen doubt in someone's eyes just because of your skin color, or been denied not for lack of money, but because you didn't look like someone who could afford that seat, then this story is for you. Like this video, share it to spread the power of silent resistance, and subscribe to Racist Exposed, where Black stories aren't just told, they're remembered. The story begins on a Tuesday afternoon at Gate 23 Halberg International Airport, just as the sign lit up boarding soon. And a black man in soft slides, calm posture, and an expression still as water before a storm walked to the front row, took his seat, and brought down an entire system from the inside. Let's begin. If someone had looked at Marcus Devonte Reed that morning, they wouldn't have seen a millionaire CEO. They would have seen a tired black man who looked like he'd just finished a food delivery in the rain. He wore soft rubber slides, the strap on one patched with black electrical tape. His joggers were faded gray with dry stains, could have been coffee, could have been leaking AC water. The hoodie hung loose on his frame, so worn that the once bold print Justice for All now just read ICE. The left sleeve was frayed to the edge of tearing. Every time he adjusted his face mask, another thread came loose. But the most striking thing was the canvas tote bag slung over his shoulder. Beige, now yellowed, printed with the logo of a civil rights symposium from 10 years ago. One corner torn, revealing a tattered notebook and a rusted thermos. Attached to the strap was a metal keychain in the shape of a raised fist, a symbol of resistance. So old it now looked more like an ornament. He wasn't in a rush. He didn't draw attention. But in an airport where appearance is a second passport, silence can be louder than sound. With every step he took, glances trailed, some pitying, some suspicious, some indifferent, but not a single one respectful. Marcus noticed. He always did. Every detail on him was read like a profile poor, out of place, doesn't belong here. The only thing on him that hadn't worn down was the way he walked, back straight, chin level, eyes forward, not proud, but never bowed. When the intercom called, "Flight 447 to Chicago, now boarding first-class passengers," Marcus stepped into the priority lane, slides tapping softly with each firm step. No one stopped him. Not yet. But he felt the headwind rising behind his neck, and he knew this wasn't going to be a peaceful flight. The first-class check-in lane wasn't crowded, just a narrow carpeted path, lit by soft overhead lights more like a VIP lounge than a boarding zone. Marcus stepped up, said nothing. He handed over a folded sheet of A4 paper yellowed slightly at the edges from last night's drizzle. Sarah Mitchell, the first-class attendant, had been chatting with a passenger in a blue blazer, latte in hand, Italian leather wallet tucked casually under arm. She smiled brightly, nodded often. Her tablet screen glowed with flight data. When Marcus extended his paper, Sarah had just turned away. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something wrong. She turned back fully. The squint that followed wasn't because of light. It was because of paper. She picked up the sheet between two fingers like it might stain her gloves. "You printed your boarding pass on A4, she asked, not hiding her disbelief. "Office printer broke," Marcus said evenly. "I printed it at a shop behind the waste station after work. The QR code still scans." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She flipped the sheet over, then back again, as if a miracle might reveal itself between the folds. "First-class passengers usually use the app," she said quietly, but loud enough for the man beside her to hear. Marcus said nothing. His eyes rested on the airline's logo behind her, as though weighing silence against explanation. She raised her tablet, tapped a few commands. Her expression shifted from confusion to doubt, to guarded indifference. "Do you have ID?" she asked. Still polite, but the distance was there now, the kind of distance people of color can smell in the air, like ozone before a storm. Marcus pulled out his wallet, handed her a driver's license. Sarah checked the photo, then looked back at him with that same scanning gaze, searching for an error that wasn't there. A young technician walking past nudged a coworker. "Bet he printed that from a scam site." Sarah didn't laugh, but her eyes lingered a second too long on Marcus's slides. Just then, her tablet beeped softly. Seat 1A, checked in. But Sarah didn't tap confirm. Her hand hung suspended midair. Her eyes, the creased sheet of paper. Marcus standing tall, not hunched, not smiling, not explaining anymore. The air froze, like someone had slowed the film, and now everyone was watching. Did that piece of paper have the right to exist here? Marcus walked into first class with a calm that seemed rehearsed in another lifetime. Seat 1A, front row, window side, pale gray leather, pillow embroidered with the airline's logo, glass of water already poured. He placed his old tote beneath the seat, picked up a loose thread from the strap, and tucked it gently under the front edge. No rush, no fuss, no violation of protocol. Sarah still stood in the aisle, tablet heavy in her hand, as if she were waiting for the universe to confirm that this couldn't be right. Across the aisle, an elderly white man, 70-something, white shirt, striped tie, cologne like an old advertisement, paused as Marcus sat. He looked at Marcus, at the slides, at the paper still in Marcus's hand. Then he let out a sharp, "Ha!" Not a laugh, a spit of disbelief. He tapped his forehead and barked, half joking, half resentful, and fully loud. "Christ, another food delivery guy." Like a match to a pressurized cabin. Some passengers turned. A few stifled chuckles. Others stared at their laps, pretending not to hear. A blonde woman coughed and fussed with her bag. Marcus looked up. No reply. "No. What did you say?" "No, I'm a passenger. Not your courier." Just a look. Quiet, cold, and long enough to stir shame where it landed. Sarah didn't move, the tablet in her hand suddenly heavier. No one defended him. No one stopped the man. No apology from seat 2A. Just Marcus silently buckling in, leaning back, like he'd heard that sentence 100 times before. Only the accent changed. The engines hummed outside. The crew prepared for takeoff, but inside the cabin, something had already veered off course. Sarah Mitchell stood at the entrance of the first-class cabin, clutching her tablet like she was holding a verdict yet to be delivered. On the screen, the name Marcus D. Reed was clearly listed at seat 1A, checked in successfully, but in her eyes, everything still felt wrong. She didn't say it aloud, didn't ask him to leave, didn't press the usual button to call security, as protocol dictated for unusual passengers. Instead, she tapped her personal radio and pressed a small button on the side. Her voice was soft, like chilled air, but deliberate. "I need Mike. Mike, the printer. Urgent." The boarding area went silent for a few seconds, as if that name had awakened something strange and specific. Mike, real name Michael Rivera, worked in the airport's tech logistics department. Not security, not a guard. He was known not for authority, but for a peculiar skill. He could identify different types of paper just by smell. A security guard once joked, "Give Mike a time-off request form, and he'll tell you it was printed on an Epson 2009 with recycled ink." No one knew if the ability was real, but Sarah believed, and today, she trusted Mike more than the data on her tablet. Marcus, seated calmly in 1A, watched her turn and speak into her radio. He couldn't hear her words, but her face said enough. He'd seen that look before, the refusal to accept a fact simply because it didn't align with what someone believes is supposed to be true. The ticket was real. The seat matched. The name checked out. But the skin color and the slides didn't fit their logic. 10 minutes later, Mike appeared from the hallway. His reflective vest was wrinkled. One hand held a massive soda, his hair a mess like he'd just crawled out of a printer room. Sarah waved him over, holding up the wrinkled A4 boarding pass like it was evidence in a trial. "Mike, help me. Is this paper real?" Mike didn't answer. He took the sheet, glanced at Marcus, then at the paper again. And that's when everything began. Mike. The printer didn't inspire confidence at first glance. He walked with a drifting gait, one shoulder higher than the other, and his eyes half shut as if constantly sniffing something invisible in the air. He accepted the paper from Sarah with 2 fingers, like it might crumble in his grasp. He flipped it front and back, nodding like a Japanese papermaster inspecting a 17th century woodblock print. Then he did something out of a surreal comedy sketch. He sniffed the paper, not a casual inhale, a deep, long draw, like one might sample an aged bottle of wine. The first-class cabin collectively held its breath. Some passengers turned to watch. A young woman covered her mouth to stifle laughter. Sarah stood frozen, waiting like she was anticipating the results of a DNA test. Mike closed his eyes. His nostrils twitched slightly. Then he opened them, tilted his head, and declared, "This kind of paper is usually used for church wedding invitations, 80 GSM. No gloss coating, slight texture, not standard airline boarding stock." He lowered the paper with a nod, like a fortune teller wrapping up a birth chart reading. Sarah nearly exhaled in relief. She turned her tablet toward Marcus, pointing at the check-in line saying nothing, as if Mike's assessment had somehow overruled the system's confirmation. Marcus raised his eyebrows. He didn't smile, didn't act surprised. He just looked at Mike, then back at Sarah, and asked gently, "So, because this paper isn't glossy, I can't sit in 1A." Sarah hesitated. "I didn't say that, but typically, first-class passengers have e-tickets, or at least a proper printed format. We have to ensure security." Marcus nodded quietly, then asked, "If I printed it on a wedding invitation, would I be allowed to board?" Someone in the back chuckled, trying not to laugh. Mike looked away, pretending to study the bottom of his soda cup. The question didn't need an answer. It was meant to hang like the scent of paper still lingering, leaving a strange aftertaste in the air. Sarah Mitchell didn't need further confirmation, though her tablet still clearly showed 1A, Marcus D. Read, check-in confirmed. The uncoated paper and Mike's sniff test had quietly reversed the entire system. "Not up to standard." That's what she whispered into the radio as she stepped aside to call dispatch. Passenger 1A, profile mismatch with first-class credentials, requesting further verification. In the first-class cabin. The atmosphere had changed. No one said it aloud, but every glance toward Marcus now carried a silent question. "Do you really belong here?" Marcus didn't change his posture. Still upright, hands resting on thighs, eyes on the window. But his hand tightened slightly, not out of anger, but out of recognition. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned whether he belonged in a respectable space. Not the first time his walk, his clothes, his paper needed extra verification because they didn't come with the sheen of whiteness or wealth. Mike had already disappeared, leaving behind a silence that clung like the scent of toner. Whether he knew what he'd just enabled or chose not to know was unclear. A black woman in seat 3C looked up and gave Marcus the faintest nod, just enough for him to know someone saw. At that moment, an airport security officer appeared at the end of the aisle called in from the dispatch line. Not aggressive, but not routine, either. Marcus stood. He didn't protest, didn't ask questions, didn't raise his voice. He just picked up the A4 sheet, the one recently labeled a wedding invitation, folded it into thirds again, and slipped it back into the corner-torn tote. Then, in a voice low enough that only Sarah could hear, he said, "Funny, isn't it one sniff and everything I paid for, confirmed, and sat down to enjoy, turned into suspicion?" Sarah stiffened, but said nothing. Marcus walked calmly alongside the security officer, out of the first-class cabin, the door closed behind him. And the empty seat at 1A was more than just physical now. It was symbolic. Sarah, for the first time that shift, felt her hand tremble over the touchscreen. The cabin door clicked shut behind Marcus with a cold, metallic sound. No one touched him, but it was clear he was no longer considered a passenger. A security officer walked beside him, face unreadable, radio in hand, no handcuffs, no tension. Just a professional escort, as if even the airline didn't know who he truly was, only certain of one thing: he didn't belong there. The domestic terminal was quieter than usual that afternoon. Not empty, but sparse enough for glances to fly like radar beams. A black man in a faded hoodie, flip-flops slapping the floor, carrying an old tote bag, walking with security. That alone was enough for everyone nearby to build their own silent story. They passed a small kiosk with a flashing LED sign, "Popcorn Paradise," real American butter flavor. The sweet smell of melted butter lingered in the air. A young man in a red uniform stood behind the counter, pouring popcorn into a tray while scrolling his phone. Marcus stopped right in front of the kiosk. Calm, no theatrics. He looked at the vendor for a second, then asked, with a voice more polite than necessary, "Sorry, do you sell self-respect here?" The vendor looked up, stunned as if he misheard. Marcus tilted his head, gave a faint smile. "No worries, just checking." The security officer blinked, unsure what just happened. He motioned for them to keep moving. Marcus nodded at the popcorn vendor and walked on, still slow, still upright. In that small moment, no one could quite tell if he was joking, mocking, or voicing a quiet philosophy. Perhaps all three. And what stood out most was this: though he had just been escorted out, Marcus still asked about self-respect, not because he'd lost it, but because this place never seemed to sell any. The auxiliary office at Halberg Airport was not a room anyone entered by choice. Thin plastic walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and plastic chairs that creaked with every breath. A ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, its sound like a countdown to something breaking. Marcus sat down, placing his tote on the table. The security officer, Mike Santos, stood slightly to the side, silent. He had been told to observe, record, do not interfere. But curiosity tugged at him. Marcus unzipped his bag and pulled out a fabric briefcase faded brown canvas, peeling leather handles, and a zipper stained with rust. It didn't match the airport's modern aesthetic, didn't match the image of a first-class passenger, didn't match any known category of important person. It looked like something fished out of a flea market bin patched with black tape on one side, and a fragile sticker slapped on clearly by Marcus himself. Mike glanced over, trying not to ask aloud. What's in there? A winning lottery ticket. A blacklist of airline execs. Marcus didn't open it right away. Instead, he took out a small cloth from his jacket pocket and wiped down the table surface. No one does that at airports except those who've once been treated like something dirty. Then, he opened the case. The zipper's rasp cracked the air like the snap of a memory box. Inside, a stack of documents in a foggy plastic sleeve, a few clipped pages, a slim leather notebook, and, at the very bottom, a separate compartment tied shut with a rubber band and paper clips. Marcus undid the band, peeling back each layer like a man carefully revisiting his past. His movements were slow, methodical, not rushed, yet a quiet storm seemed to gather in the silence. Mike leaned forward a bit, but didn't speak. Marcus didn't look at him. He just murmured. Been carrying this case since my first year in business. Ugly as hell. Can't replace it. Feels like it knows. I still need it to stay honest. And at that exact moment, his fingers found the thing all this patience had been leading toward. He didn't pull it out just yet. Not yet. But from that invisible, unimpressive bag, a truth began to emerge. Not from wealth, but from the way we judge what's worth remembering and what we leave to rot at the bottom of old luggage. Marcus removed the final rubber band and slowly pulled out a thin plastic folder slightly curled at the edges. Inside was a standard-size sheet, laminated, with worn silver trim, a document once carefully kept, then hurriedly tucked away where no one would ever see it. He laid it flat on the table. The fan above sent a faint gust that made it flutter. Mike Santos, the security officer, tilted his head to read it. At first, just the bold heading. Certificate of Shareholding, Atlantic Airways. Then the name below it, in heavy font. Marcus Devonte Reed. And to the right, printed with chilling clarity. 3.5% stake. Mike froze, speechless. Marcus didn't look at him. He adjusted the paper slightly, like he was making room for the truth to take its rightful seat at the table. But the strangest, almost laughable detail was in the bottom left corner of the laminated sheet. It was chewed, not torn, not broken, bitten by ants. A tiny curved patch like nature's tooth mark on something meant to be untouchable. Mike stared, then blurted, "Why'd ants get to this?" Marcus shrugged. Left it near a honey jar while moving. Ants found their way in, went straight for the company logo. Then he smiled. A rare kind of smile, neither bitter nor triumphant. Fitting. Really. The smallest creatures mark the thing with the most power. Mike nearly spoke, but didn't. He looked at Marcus, the shareholder document, the invisible case, and suddenly everything he'd believed about who looks like they belong, where, began to fall apart. Marcus gently folded the sheet and slid it back into the folder, then turned to Mike. "I don't need them to believe. I just need this system to remember I wasn't asking to be invited. I already live in the house." And with a nod, Marcus closed his case. The door of resistance doesn't always slam shut. Sometimes, it opens with a presence you can't ignore. The internal office door shut behind Marcus, but the ripple at gate 23 had just begun. No alarms, no shouting, just camera flashes. A white man in seat 2A had already opened his livestream app, speaking directly into the lens. I don't know what's going on, but that man of color clearly wasn't welcome in first class. Zoom in. Zoom in. To the left of the boarding gate. A 20-something girl opened TikTok, propped her phone on her suitcase, and tilted her face toward the best lighting. She wasn't filming Marcus. She was filming herself with the caption, "Witnessed racism with my own eyes. Actually shaken." Her eyes sparkled with filters, and a sad piano track played underneath. Behind the boarding desk, an airline staffer quietly activated the internal recording mode on her iPad, not to protect anyone, but to protect herself. A middle-aged woman business suit. CEO Energy called someone on FaceTime. This is exactly why I don't trust self-service boarding. Humans still discriminate even with valid tickets. In the waiting area, passengers began to murmur. Some scrolled Twitter and saw that Gate 23 was trending. Hashtags like Racist Exposed, Gate 23 Incident, and Atlantic Gate were on the rise. A young boy pointed his phone at his parents. The father, mid-sentence, adjusted his blazer when he noticed the camera and spoke clearly. "We're not taking sides. We just want justice to be served." Everyone was recording, each from their own angle, each building their own narrative. A lighting technician passing through muttered, "This gate feels more like a film set than an airport." But the strangest part, no one asked Marcus for his name. No one asked if he really bought the ticket. No one wanted to know. Because in a world driven by feeds and filters, truth can wait, but video must go live before someone else steals the views. She appeared from behind the charging station column short skirt, crop top, platinum-dyed hair, and a gimbal setup better than most journalists. Her TikTok handle was @TruthQueenie88, known for real-life activism which really meant starring in other people's stories. When she saw the crowd recording Marcus, she stepped into the frame not with empathy, but with a walk rehearsed in the mirror. "Oh no, not again," she gasped, voice high and theatrically strained. She clutched her chest and, as if on cue, collapsed onto the airport carpet like a falling houseplant. A nearby college student froze. "Are you okay?" She cracked one eye open, moaned. I just can't take this kind of injustice. I have PTSD from that time an airline staff member rejected me because my skin was too tanned." The atmosphere snapped not from sympathy, but collective confusion. A live streamer quietly tilted their camera away. An elderly woman pulled down her reading glasses, read the TikTok caption, and shook her head. An airline employee walking by paused for a beat, then kept going. There was nothing in the training manual for fake fainting due to a suntan. And in one corner, the black woman in a blazer who had witnessed the entire Marcus incident turned her face away. Not out of anger, but exhaustion. "They fight over the spotlight," she murmured, "but the light never lands on the one who actually needs to be seen." The TikToker sat up, fixed her hair, and checked her phone for engagement. A new comment popped up. "She's so brave for sharing her experience." Followed by another. "Wait, did she just say suntan?" And while Marcus remained under suspicion behind frosted glass, someone else had just collected nearly 3,000 likes for a staged collapse and a pain no one could verify. No one really knew what was happening, but everyone believed they were documenting history. Every corner of Gate 23 now had at least one recording device, iPhones perched on suitcases, GoPros strapped to crossbody bags, tablets with screen record on standby. An older man even wore sunglasses with a hidden camera filming everything. No blinking required. Nearby, 3 passengers whispered fiercely. "But I saw his boarding pass. That didn't look like a real ticket, but the system said checked in. Who knows? Could have been fake, or hacked the app." One airline employee quickly tapped into the ticket registration system, but before they could verify, A supervisor called them away. Online, the hashtag MarcusGate was picking up steam, but it was all speculation. People guessed who Marcus might be, guessed if he was some undercover CEO, guessed which video was the most real. No one asked the boarding agent if the code was scanned. No one accessed the airline database to verify the QR. No one even thought to open the Atlantic Airways app, type in the ticket number, and check. Until a teenager in headphones, lying across 2 seats, glanced up from his phone and mumbled to no one in particular. 12 cameras, 7 live streams, and not one person checked the app to see that his boarding pass was real. A few seconds of silence fell across the area. No one responded. A middle-aged man cleared his throat and shifted his seat. A live stream girl shut her phone, pretending the battery had died. That one offhand comment like something from a Stephen Chow comedy seemed absurd, but held the axis of the entire conflict. Inside the office, Marcus still sat quietly, refolding his documents, adjusting his bag. He didn't need to say a word. Truth doesn't need to shout it, just needs the patience to stand still while the crowd chases emotion. Marcus didn't return to seat 1A. He didn't glance back at the crowd still hesitating behind the glass. He simply walked quietly toward the glass wall opposite the check-in desk where a large sign hung. Bold white text on a navy blue background. "We take pride in fair service for all." The slogan sat neatly inside a silver aluminum frame, the kind of thing so familiar in airports that no one really sees it anymore. It was wallpaper formal, but hollow. Marcus stopped. He stood in front of the sign, arms relaxed at his sides, eyes straight ahead, no frown, no sarcastic smirk, not even a blink too many. He just looked. No one understood what he was doing. No one stepped in. But the entire area around Gate 23 seemed to still. Phones recording him began to rise higher. No one dared enter the frame. Instinctively, they knew this was not a moment for commentary. Sarah Mitchell, still standing near the boarding bridge, glimpsed the image through the glass. A single figure, standing tall, facing the promise she herself had read every day yet never really absorbed. The words "fair service for all" now reflected onto Marcus's face. And in that moment, it wasn't him who looked misplaced, it was the slogan that looked ashamed. Marcus didn't speak, didn't move, didn't gesture to resist the silence because his silence was already undoing everything. And sometimes, a black man in a faded hoodie, simply standing upright in front of a lie, is enough to make a whole system tremble. The air at Gate 23 felt like a stage gone dark. Everyone was waiting, but no one knew what they were waiting for. Marcus stood still. Then, after a slow breath, he raised his hand and gently touched the metal frame of the sign. A faint click sounded so soft, it barely registered, but the movement, his fingers slipping beneath the lower left corner, drew every eye. No one stopped him. No one encouraged him. They just watched. Marcus undid each latch. Slowly. Deliberately. Without hurry, as if he were peeling back the dust from a memory. Not removing a plastic plaque. The sign came off the wall with a quiet creak, like it hadn't been touched in years. He cradled it in his arms, turned it sideways not to show anyone, not to make a scene, but for one purpose. From his tote, he pulled out a gray lens cleaning cloth, the rough fibered kind, with frayed edges and faint text still visible. "Cleanliness is respect," a tagline from the airport janitorial campaign. A freebie handed out to bathroom attendants who passed mirror cleaning inspections. Marcus didn't explain, didn't say he kept it out of pride, didn't say he brought it today expecting any of this. He just held the sign in one hand and started wiping it down with the other. From top to bottom, Each stroke was slow not because of dust, but because something long neglected needed to be seen again. No one joked. No one laughed. What seemed like a small gesture done by a man just kicked out of first class for not looking the part suddenly became an indictment. Sarah Mitchell, standing 10 meters away, watched her lips trembling slightly. A nearby passenger whispered to their friend, "He's cleaning the very words this airline never lived up to." Marcus wiped the sign clean every smudge, every fingerprint, every flake of chipped paint along its plastic edge as if each corner held 1,000 unspoken apologies. And when he turned it around, the crowd froze. The back of the sign, identical in design, read, "We take pride in fair service for all." But this time, it was printed backward, a mirror image. A manufacturing error no one had caught because no one had ever bothered to remove it. And there it was, a tiny, bitter truth exposed. They had hung the sign backward for years. No one corrected it, no one noticed, and no one thought it mattered. Marcus stared at the reversed words for a moment. He didn't laugh. He didn't cry. He simply reached into his bag and pulled out a roll of gray duct tape, the same tape used to mend his worn-out bag strap. And perhaps, now, the only trustworthy tool in this entire system. He knelt on one knee, exactly the way people do when rebuilding something that's fallen apart. Carefully. He flipped the sign to the correct orientation, pressed it back against the glass wall, and began to tape it in place edge by edge. No maintenance crew, no tools, just a man removed from his first-class seat now restoring a declaration the system had long let slide. An elderly woman whispered, "No one ever noticed that before." A young man live-streaming added a caption. They had it backwards, the slogan, the treatment, everything. Marcus finished taping. He stepped back and looked up. The sign, now facing the right direction, caught the ceiling lights. The letters no longer reversed, just an ordinary slogan. But now that it was correct, it finally made people uncomfortable. Marcus turned to the crowd, eyes sweeping the room, and he said, softly, "They hung the sign backwards. I just helped them turn it around." The executive boardroom of Atlantic Airways, perched on the 17th floor, had high ceilings, bulletproof glass walls, and a long, walnut-veneered conference table. The company's gold-plated logo hung proudly on the wall. Everything in that room was designed to declare one thing: we are the ones who make the decisions. And that's why, during the emergency meeting with Marcus Devonte Reed, every board member sat upright, ties perfectly knotted, eyes locked on their personal tablets. Until Marcus walked in. No PowerPoint, no files opened, no title introduction. He simply said, "Before we begin with Clause 12.3, I'd like everyone to take part in a small exercise, a short experience." A senior director asked, half polite, half skeptical, "What kind of experience, Mr. Reed?" Marcus nodded at his assistant. A temporary name board, an A4 paper list, and 7 blue plastic chairs were wheeled in and placed along the wall. He gestured to the far end of the room. "I'd like all board members to line up alphabetically by last name. No electronic devices, no personal assistants, no priority access." The silence that followed came back like an echo. No one laughed. No one reacted at first. A few stood hesitantly. Some looked around, hoping someone would confirm it was a joke. But Marcus's eyes, neither angry nor sarcastic, left them with no dignified excuse to refuse. One by one, they left their leather chairs and moved to form a line. Someone asked softly, "Do I go before you?" Another awkwardly stepped out of place, then shifted back. Within 5 minutes, the most powerful decision-making room in the airline had been transformed into a basic economy check-in line. And no one was told what they were experiencing. Only that, for the first time, they were standing and waiting. The line moved slowly, not because anyone instructed it to, but because no one dared disrupt the rhythm of this strange silence. No check-in counter, no queue numbers, just a list of names taped to the glass wall with double-sided tape. Marcus gave no orders, didn't time them. He simply sat quietly by the window, observing like a passenger once flagged as unclear status, watching a system now quietly audit itself. A CFO murmured, "This feels like some kind of psychological test." No one responded. 1 minute passed, then 2, until it was the chairman's turn, a man in his 60s, white, silver-haired, wearing a tailored Savile Row suit. He stepped forward and looked up at the name board. Something flared inside him, maybe age, maybe habit, but he couldn't hold it in anymore. "This is absurd," he said, louder than necessary. No one interrupted. He turned to Marcus, voice taut like a string pulled too tight. "You're making us play economy class passengers. In a shareholder meeting, I hold an MBA from Harvard. Mr. Reed." The words landed like a spell, and for a few seconds, they hung in the air, half defensive, half accusation. A few board members looked away. Someone cleared their throat. Harvard, 2 syllables that once acted as a badge, a shield of legitimacy, an invisible garment of power. But now, they sounded like the final protest of a class being asked to stand somewhere they'd never had to. Marcus remained seated, still silent. No smugness. No triumph. He simply nodded, didn't reply, didn't need to. His answer came not through a rebuttal, but through a quiet smile. Moments later, "After the chairman's sharp, I hold an MBA from Harvard," the room sank into a different kind of silence. Not tension, emptiness, as if someone had just opened a luxury briefcase to find nothing but old business cards and a wrinkled tie inside. Marcus looked at him. He didn't rush. He let the atmosphere do its job, exposing the kind of logic that had long been defended by credentials, power, and brass plaques on office doors. Then he smiled. Not mockingly. No raised voice, no shaking shoulders. Just a subtle curve of the lips as if someone had finally spoken the answer to a forgotten question. "And I hold a degree in silence," Marcus said. 20 years as a CEO in the blind spot of the system." A marketing director paused mid-sip. Another board member glanced up at the Atlantic Airways logo on the wall as if suddenly unsure what the company really stood for anymore. Marcus's words didn't need logic. They weren't a rebuttal. They were a quiet reality laid next to the glossy diplomas and overpowering them by the sheer gravity of lived experience. He stood, walked to the whiteboard behind him, and wrote just one line. "When the system refuses to see you, become what it cannot forget." Then he put the marker down, returned to his seat, and sat as if he'd never left. A CFO whispered, "I think we should resume with Clause 12.3. No one objected. Because after 20 years, the man once forced out of CIET 1A was now rewriting the rules from CIET 0. The announcement echoed through the intercom. The female voice was steady, but this time, not indifferent. "Passenger Marcus Devonte Reed, please return to Flight 447. Seat 1A remains reserved." No applause. No fireworks. But many eyes in the departure lounge fell quiet. Phones were raised not to shame, but to capture a moment that seemed to reset the world. Marcus didn't walk fast, nor slow. His steady steps down the boarding bridge looked less like a man re-entering a plane, and more like someone reclaiming a role the script had tried to erase. The faded tote bag still hung on his shoulder. The worn-out slippers still echoed with soft slaps, but now, no one dared suggest they belonged to someone who didn't. The cabin door opened. Sarah Mitchell was standing there. Her eyes met Marcus's, and in that fleeting moment, longer than any check-in she'd ever done, something shifted. She didn't apologize. He didn't demand it. But her nod was its own language, no excuses, no defenses, just a quiet, I saw what I once refused to see. Marcus walked past. No pause, no declaration. But each step he took left a silence behind where old gazes had once tried to define him. The passengers in first class no longer looked at him like he didn't belong. A man in a suit at seat 2B nodded respectfully. A black woman in row 3 placed her hand over her chest, a wordless, "Thank you." When Marcus reached seat 1A, he stopped. On the leather cushion, alongside the neck pillow, lay a folded piece of paper, neatly placed, like an invitation. He glanced around. No one seemed to notice. He picked it up, and for a moment, his eyes softened. Not from memory, but because something had just been set right. He unfolded the note with both hands. Slowly. Like opening a memory he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch, colored pencil, notebook paper. The lines were amateur but precise, a brown-skinned face, tight curls, black-rimmed glasses, a gray hoodie, with the barely there lettering, "Justice for All." Below the drawing, in uneven, all-caps handwriting as if copied straight from someone's heart. "Do not ignore again." No signature, no caption, no hashtags, no sender. Marcus stood still. His hands held the paper like it was a contract not for property, but for something deeper, proof that his presence had reached someone. He looked around. No one came forward, and he didn't need them to. Because sometimes, the truest recognition comes from those who don't want to be recognized. A flight attendant passing by paused, about to ask him to take his seat, but then she saw the paper, saw his expression, and quietly moved on. Marcus folded the note gently, like folding a memory. He opened his inner jacket pocket and placed it beside the share certificate, two seemingly unrelated documents that, together, proved he was here for reasons no one could deny. He didn't sit immediately. He let the paper rest against his chest a few moments longer, as if it needed to warm his heart before touching ground. When Marcus finally took his seat in 1A, his eyes didn't meet anyone else's. He looked out the window. The sky wasn't any bluer, but this time, it wasn't turning away. Seat 1A hadn't changed, but the man sitting in it had. Not because his rights were restored, but because he no longer needed to prove he deserved them. The chief flight attendant approached. No iPad, no boarding check, just a respectful nod. "Mr. Reed, if you need water or a blanket, please don't hesitate to press the call button." Marcus nodded. "Thank you, I'm fine." He didn't need champagne, didn't need an extra meal. The only thing he needed and now finally had was not to be questioned for simply taking his seat. From 3C, a brown-skinned teen leaned forward slightly, didn't say a word, just gave a thumbs up, then quickly withdrew it. Marcus smiled, a quiet nod, his version of safe travels. Sarah Mitchell passed by. She opened her mouth to speak, then stopped. She nodded instead. No apology. No words needed. There was something in her eyes like the final patch of ice melting on glass. The engines began to hum. The pilot's voice came over the speaker. "Prepare for takeoff." Marcus exhaled. Not deeply, but truly. The drawing was still in his pocket, but he didn't need to look at it anymore, because from this seat, he now knew exactly who he was, and so did everyone else. It was still Flight 447, but after 45 minutes and a quiet reckoning, Seat 1A had become a symbol. Not of privilege, but of recognition. Sarah Mitchell stood behind the curtains of the National DEI conference stage. Her breath was steady, but her hand lightly gripped the edge of an A5 sheet. Not a speech, just a few notes. She didn't come to read a script. She came to say something that had lived in her heart for the past year. The host introduced her. Our next speaker is someone who stood between mistake and responsibility, and instead of turning away, she chose to walk toward the light. Sarah stepped onto the stage. No thunderous applause, no spotlight, but the room of 300 fell silent. Some knew who she was, some didn't, but every pair of eyes asked the same question. "What are you here to say?" She spoke briefly, not about Marcus, about herself. About standing before a black man with a valid ticket and still doubting him. About how familiar-looking made her trust some and underestimate others. And about the moment she saw the sign that read, "Equity for All," hung upside down. After a few minutes, the moderator asked, "If you could keep only one thing, one deepest lesson from that day, just one, what would it be?" Sarah looked down at the sheet in her hand, then slipped it into her jacket pocket. She lifted her head, eyes scanning toward the very back row. Her voice was calm, steady. Never underestimate someone in slippers. No laughter, no applause. Some nodded. A young person typed it into their phone. An older attendee took off their glasses and wiped the lenses. That sentence needed no expansion. It was enough, just like the man once underestimated, quiet, unadorned, and powerful enough to make an entire system reflect. And while Sarah Mitchell spoke those words at the conference, never underestimate someone in slippers in a quiet corner of West Chicago. Marcus was pouring tea. The small room where he worked each morning wasn't much a wooden desk, a laptop, a small window facing a neighbor's rooftop. But on a low shelf in the kitchen stood one carefully placed object, almost like an altar. A white porcelain teapot, rim cracked, handle slightly crooked. His mother had used it for over 30 years, not because it was beautiful, but because it never poured wrong. Just enough. Never too much. Never too little. Never broke. Marcus wasn't live streaming. He replayed Sarah's talk on his phone, and when she mentioned the slippers, he paused mid-pour. He didn't laugh. He just nodded, the kind of nod that accepts something deep inside has been seen. By someone else. Then he kept pouring. No camera. No hashtags. Just water flowing from his mother's pot into a cup, and a breath quiet, steady, needing no approval. He set the tea down on a wooden tray and sat on his plain chair. The room felt brighter not because of sunlight, but because someone had finally spoken what he'd long stopped saying. From that old pot to the worn-down slippers, nothing was luxurious, but they held value simply by enduring without asking, without explaining, without applause. No one filmed Marcus drinking his tea. No viral posts, no TikTok reactions, but the story began to spread not like a media storm, but like warm steam slipping under a door, slow, steady, unstoppable. The next day, a small airline in Oregon quietly replaced all their boarding signs, making sure they were aligned. No press release. Just a line in the staff memo, self-audit, starting with the smallest things. A week later, a high school in Kansas used the phrase, "Do not ignore again," in a civics exam, as an example of mindful observation over assumption. A month later, a shoe company released a line called the Justice Slip-Ons, inspired by Marcus's sandals free to black students studying aviation. And Marcus. He still poured tea from the same chipped pot, still kept the drawing that read, "Do not ignore again," on his bookshelf. No frame, no laminate. Next to it, a slip of handwritten paper from an anonymous passenger. "I used to think justice meant pounding fists on tables. Thank you for showing me sometimes. It starts by standing up, then standing still. The incident at Gate 23 was never turned into a film. But it's been retold in classrooms, in boardrooms, at dinner tables, and in the way we now glance at those we once thought we didn't need to notice. Not because Marcus once sat in seat 1A, but because he was once asked to stand and returned not with rage, but with a presence that could no longer be unseen.
If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.